First case. Fidel Lopez was 24 years old when a private encounter inside an apartment in Sunrise turned into one of the most extreme domestic homicide cases prosecuted in Broward County. On September 20, 2015, Lopez killed his girlfriend, Maria Nemoth, inside the apartment complex where they both lived. The case would later be defined not just by jealousy, but by the level of violence that followed and the evidence Lopez left behind. Maria Nemoth was 31 years old and worked as a leasing agent at the Colonnade Residences, the same complex where she lived and where she first met Lopez. Co-workers and residents knew her as professional, reliable, and friendly. Court records and media coverage consistently describe her as close to her family, particularly her father and her uncle, Juan Cavisudo, who would later speak forcefully during court proceedings. On the night of the killing, Nemoth and Lopez were alone in her apartment. According to Lopez's own statements to police, the situation escalated after Nemoth reportedly spoke the name of her former husband during an intimate moment. Investigators later emphasized that this was not evidence of infidelity, but rather Lopez's reaction to perceived rejection. What followed was not a brief outburst. It was a sustained and escalating attack. Investigative reports and court testimony established that Lopez continued to assault Nemoth after she lost consciousness. Prosecutors documented that he used multiple objects found inside the apartment, including a beer bottle and a hair straightener, along with his hands. The medical examiner confirmed that the injuries were deliberate and extensive. Authorities were careful in court to explain these facts without dramatization, but the severity played a central role in how the crime was charged. At some point after the assault, Lopez contacted emergency services and reported that Nemoth was not breathing. Neighbors also reported hearing distress. When police arrived at the apartment, they found Nemoth deceased. Lopez was still present and was immediately taken into custody. Officers noted signs of violence inside the apartment that were inconsistent with any claim of accident. During questioning, Lopez gave shifting explanations before eventually admitting to the attack. The medical examiner's findings were critical to the case. Testimony established that the injuries could not have occurred accidentally and that the violence continued beyond any initial emotional reaction. Prosecutors argued that the continuation of the assault after Nemoth was unconscious demonstrated intent and control, directly contradicting any suggestion of a momentary loss of awareness. These findings shaped the state's decision to pursue the most serious charges available under Florida law. As the case moved through pre-trial proceedings in Broward County, prosecutors made clear they were prepared to seek the death penalty. Defense attorneys explored mental health arguments, but they faced overwhelming physical evidence and Lopez's own admissions. Rather than proceed to a jury trial that would require graphic testimony and prolonged proceedings, Lopez entered into plea negotiations with the state. In August 2017, Fidel Lopez pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and sexual battery. The plea agreement removed the possibility of a death sentence but carried a mandatory outcome. The judge sentenced Lopez to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never be released. During sentencing, the court heard emotional impact statements from Nemoth's family. Her uncle, Juan Cavisudo, spoke publicly about who Maria Nemoth was beyond the crime. He described her as a hard-working professional who took pride in her job and cared deeply about her family. Her father also addressed the court, focusing on the permanent absence left by her death. Prosecutors emphasized that the plea spared the family from reliving the details of the crime during a trial, while still delivering the maximum punishment allowed under the agreement. Second case. Angel Esteban Feliz Rodriguez walked into a New York City police precinct in April 2019 and told officers he had killed his girlfriend. He did not argue. He did not deny it. He simply said the words out loud. Police officers listened and took him seriously. His confession led them to an apartment in the Morris Heights area of the Bronx. Inside that apartment, officers found Indira Rivera, She was only 21 years old. She was already dead. This was the same home where the couple had been living together. What police uncovered was not a loud or public crime. It was something that happened in private, inside a home, driven by jealousy, control, and anger that had been growing in the relationship long before that night. According to police and prosecutors, the killing happened during an argument inside the apartment. There was no sign that anyone had broken into the home. The door was not forced open. Windows were not smashed. There was no evidence that a stranger had entered. Everything showed that the violence came from someone already inside the apartment. Medical findings later showed that Indira Rivera died from pressure to her neck. This matched strangulation. These findings confirmed what the police already believed based on the confession. After the attack, Angel Esteban Feliz Rodriguez did not run away. He did not leave the city. He did not try to pretend nothing happened. Instead, he stayed inside the apartment with Indira's body. Police later said he remained there for close to 2 days. During this time, Indira's phone went silent. Friends and family tried to reach her. Messages were sent. Calls were made. None were answered. People who cared about her had no idea that something terrible had already happened. The time spent inside the apartment after the killing became one of the most troubling parts of the case. Days passed. The outside world kept moving. Neighbors went on with their lives, but inside the apartment, nothing changed. Indira's life had ended, and her body was still there. This delay meant that help did not arrive right away. It also meant that loved ones were left in confusion before the truth finally came out. The case took a serious turn when Feliz Rodriguez finally left the apartment and went straight to the NYPD's 48th precinct. He spoke directly to officers and said he had killed his girlfriend. He also gave police the keys to the apartment. This allowed officers to enter without delay. When they went inside, they found Indira Rivera lying unresponsive on the bed. Emergency responders arrived but could not save her. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Investigators later confirmed that she had died days earlier, which made the delay between the killing and the confession very important to the case. Prosecutors later explained that the relationship had been troubled. They described it as one filled with jealousy and fear about cheating. These feelings had been present before the final argument. In many cases like this, violence does not appear all at once. It builds slowly. Small arguments turn into bigger ones. Trust breaks down. Control grows stronger. In this case, a private argument inside a home turned deadly very quickly. There was no public fight. No one on the street heard screaming. No neighbor called police right away. There were no witnesses outside the apartment. Only 2 people were inside that home during the argument, and only one survived. This kind of isolation is common in domestic violence cases. Because the harm happens in private, it often takes longer for others to realize something is wrong. After his arrest, Feliz Rodriguez was formally charged with murder and manslaughter. The legal process began. Prosecutors looked closely at the confession he gave police. They also studied the medical reports and the timeline of events. The fact that he stayed in the apartment with Indira's body for nearly 2 days was included as part of the case record. These facts shaped how the case moved forward in court. Instead of going through a full trial, the case ended with a plea agreement. In December 2019, Angel Esteban Feliz Rodriguez pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter. By doing this, he accepted responsibility in court. This also meant the case would not go to a jury trial. Prosecutors said this decision spared Indira's family from hearing painful details during a long court process. The sentencing happened in early 2020. The Bronx District Attorney's Office announced that Feliz Rodriguez was sentenced to 17 years in state prison. After completing his prison sentence, he will also face 5 years of post-release supervision. If you're a fan of true crime videos, please support my channel by smashing the like button and subscribing. I'd really appreciate that. Third case. Chance Donahoe could not accept that the relationship had come to an end. On the night of August 29, 2023, in Columbus, jealousy and rejection turned into deliberate violence that ended the life of his former girlfriend, Shannon Hyatt. Prosecutors later made clear that this was not a sudden loss of control. It was a series of choices that unfolded step by step, each one moving closer to an irreversible outcome. The case was prosecuted in Franklin County, where investigators laid out a detailed timeline. Hyatt had ended the relationship and was attempting to move forward with her life. Friends and witnesses later told police she was seeing someone else. According to court filings, Donahoe became fixated on that fact. On the night of the killing, he drove past Hyatt's residence and noticed a vehicle he did not recognize parked outside. That moment mattered. Prosecutors said it fueled his jealousy and set the next events in motion. Instead of leaving the area, Donahoe made a conscious decision to prepare. Evidence presented in court showed that he drove roughly 20 miles away, changed into all-black clothing, obtained a knife, and then drove approximately 20 miles back to Hyatt's home. Prosecutors emphasized this sequence to demonstrate planning and intent. This was not a brief confrontation that escalated without warning. The travel, the clothing change, and the weapon selection were all cited as actions that showed forethought. When Donahoe returned, he confronted Shannon Hyatt. According to medical examiner findings and charging documents, she was stabbed approximately 30 times. Prosecutors described the attack as sustained and intentional. The number of wounds was not treated as a statistic, but as evidence that the violence continued rather than stopping after a single act. First responders arrived after the attack had ended. Hyatt did not survive her injuries. Following the killing, Donahoe left the scene. Shortly afterward, he surrendered to police in Liberty Township, also known as Powell, Ohio, without incident. Law enforcement officials confirmed that he turned himself in and was taken into custody. He was later transferred to Franklin County, where the criminal case formally began. Investigators focused on the relationship history, the events of that night, and Donahoe's movements before and after the attack. As the case moved forward, prosecutors outlined what they described as a clear pattern. The relationship ended. Hyatt set boundaries. Donahoe refused to accept them. The state argued that jealousy over her independence, combined with possessiveness, drove his actions. There was no claim that Hyatt posed a threat, and no evidence presented that she initiated violence. The focus remained on Donahoe's choices before, during, and after the killing. Medical testimony played a central role. The forensic pathologist confirmed the cause of death as multiple stab wounds and testified that the injuries were consistent with a sustained assault. Prosecutors linked this testimony directly to the evidence of planning, arguing that the preparation beforehand and the continuation of violence during the attack reinforced intent. Together, these elements formed the foundation of the most serious charges under Ohio law. In August 2024, Chance Donahoe entered a guilty plea to aggravated murder and gross abuse of a corpse. The plea resolved the case without a full jury trial, sparing witnesses and family members from prolonged proceedings. During sentencing, defense attorneys filed a memorandum asking the court to consider Donahoe's history of substance use, including methamphetamine, cocaine, and alcohol, and claimed mental health struggles at the time of the offense. These arguments were presented as mitigation, not as a denial of responsibility. The court acknowledged the defense submission, but ultimately focused on the severity of the crime and the evidence of planning. The judge sentenced Donahoe to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 31 years. The sentence reflected Ohio law and balanced punishment with the structured parole framework. Fourth case. Justin Cole Carroll refused to accept that his relationship with Donasia Alexis Holloway was over. By 2021, Donasia had ended the relationship and was trying to move forward with her life. Carroll did not move on. Prosecutors later showed that his jealousy and need for control continued even after clear legal boundaries were put in place. What followed in Walterboro, South Carolina, became one of the state's most disturbing cases involving stalking and ignored restraining orders. Donasia Holloway took formal steps to protect herself. After repeated unwanted contact and behavior she found threatening, she went to court and obtained a no-contact restraining order against Carol. The order clearly barred him from contacting her or approaching her in person. Prosecutors emphasized that Carol was fully aware of the order. He had been served. He understood its terms. Despite that, evidence showed he continued to monitor Donasia's movements and appear near places she frequented. The breakup did not end his fixation. Instead, jealousy intensified, and control remained his focus. Investigators later described Carol's behavior as stalking. They outlined a pattern of repeated violations of legal boundaries meant to keep Donasia safe. This was not treated as a single misunderstanding. It was ongoing conduct. Donasia relied on the legal system, believing the restraining order would create distance and safety. Prosecutors later argued that Carol's refusal to respect that order showed a deliberate choice to place his own desires above the law. The murder occurred on May 22, 2021. That evening, Donasia drove to the Forest Point Apartments in Walterboro and sat inside her car in the parking lot. She did not know Carol had followed her there. According to prosecutors, Carol approached her vehicle despite knowing he was legally barred from doing so. In a moment that would later become central to the case, Donasia used her phone to record a short Snapchat video, capturing Carol walking toward her car. The footage showed her awareness that something was wrong. Moments later, Carol opened fire. Prosecutors said he shot Donasia multiple times while she was still seated inside her car. There was no evidence of a struggle and no indication that she posed any threat. Nearby residents heard gunshots and called for help. First responders arrived quickly, but Donasia's injuries were fatal. She was pronounced dead at the scene. In the immediate aftermath, police questioned Carol. At that point, officers did not yet have enough evidence to charge him, and he was questioned and released within hours. Investigators continued working the case, collecting physical evidence and reviewing Donasia's phone. 2 days later, everything changed. When investigators examined her phone, they discovered the Snapchat video Donasia had recorded just before she was killed. The footage placed Carol at the scene moments before the shooting. Combined with other developing evidence, it shifted the investigation. Carol was arrested 2 days after the murder and formally charged. As the case deepened, prosecutors uncovered additional evidence. Forensic testing showed gunshot residue on Carol's hand, linking him directly to firing a weapon. Investigators also learned that after the killing, Carol had shaved his head, which prosecutors argued was an attempt to change his appearance. Evidence showed he had also wiped his cell phone clean, removing data that could have revealed his movements and communications. Prosecutors said these actions demonstrated awareness of guilt, not confusion or panic. The investigation also brought Carol's past into focus. Prosecutors informed the court that he had a significant criminal history. In 2016, Carol had been convicted of first-degree assault and battery, a violent offense for which he served 3 years in prison. While jurors were instructed to focus on the facts of the 2021 murder, this history was relevant during sentencing and in understanding the broader risk he posed. The trial took place in April 2024 in Colleton County. Jurors heard a detailed timeline: the breakup, the restraining order, the stalking, and the events of May 22, 2021. They watched the Snapchat video recorded by Donasia moments before her death. Prosecutors described it as a silent witness, showing Carol approaching her car in direct violation of the court order. They argued this was not a chance encounter or a sudden argument, but the final step in a pattern of control. The defense raised questions, but the evidence was extensive. There was no credible claim of self-defense. Donasia was inside her car. Carol approached her. He was armed. The shooting followed. Jurors were asked to consider not only the final minutes, but the repeated warnings Carol ignored beforehand. After deliberation, the jury found Justin Cole Carroll guilty of murder. On April 24, 2024, Justin Cole Carroll was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Donasia Holloway lost her life after trying to protect herself through the legal system. Fifth case: Tanaka Zivanai became the central figure in a fatal case that showed how jealousy and control can lead to irreversible harm. In August 2024, his relationship with Zanelli Sibanda, a 28-year-old care worker, ended in violence on a public street in Gloucester. The facts of the case were later confirmed through police statements and court records. What happened was not unclear or disputed. It unfolded in front of witnesses, was followed by an immediate arrest, and resulted in a life sentence in January 2025. Zivanai and Zanelli lived together in the Tredworth area. According to prosecutors, their relationship had become tense and unstable in the months before the killing. Zivanai repeatedly accused Zanelli of being unfaithful. These accusations were not supported by evidence, but they dominated their arguments and shaped his behavior. Neighbors later told investigators they had heard frequent shouting from the home, suggesting a pattern of conflict rather than a single argument gone wrong. On the 27th of August 2024, in the early hours of the morning, that conflict moved into the open. Zivanai confronted Zanelli on a residential street. Witnesses said the exchange escalated quickly. Zivanai attacked her with a knife, stabbing her multiple times in full view of members of the public. This was not a secluded place. It was a street where people lived, walked, and drove past. Emergency services were called immediately by witnesses who realized the seriousness of the situation. Police officers arrived within minutes. Zanelli received urgent medical attention at the scene, but her injuries were catastrophic. She was pronounced dead shortly afterward. Officers arrested Zivanai at the scene of the attack. A knife was recovered nearby. From the first moments of the investigation, police described the evidence as strong, supported by eyewitness accounts, forensic findings, and Zivanai's presence at the location. As the case moved forward, prosecutors focused on motive and preparation. In court, it was confirmed that Zivanai had brought the knife with him from home. The judge later made clear that this detail mattered. Bringing a weapon to the confrontation showed planning and intent. It meant the attack was not a sudden, unplanned reaction. It was a deliberate act carried out after Zivanai had armed himself. In November 2024, Zivanai appeared at Bristol Crown Court. He pleaded guilty to the murder of Zanelli Sibanda and to possession of a bladed article in a public place. Because of the guilty plea, there was no full trial, but the sentencing hearing allowed the court to examine the full impact of the crime. Statements described the scale of the loss and the circumstances that led to Zanelli's death. One of the most significant facts presented to the court was the impact on Zanelli's family. She left behind 2 children, aged 2 and 9. Prosecutors explained that these children lost their mother suddenly and violently. Victim impact statements described how her death created a permanent gap in their lives. The court was told that Zanelli had been a devoted parent, working as a care worker while raising her children. During sentencing in January 2025, the judge addressed Zivanai directly. The judge stated that the attack was brutal, public, and entirely one-sided. There was no evidence of self-defense. The court rejected any suggestion that the killing was the result of a momentary loss of control. The fact that Zivanai brought the knife from home showed clear intent. The judge emphasized that jealousy does not justify violence and that accusations alone do not excuse lethal action. Zivanai was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder. The judge set a minimum term of 20 years and 10 months. Meaning he must serve at least that amount of time before being eligible to apply for parole. In addition, the court imposed a 2-year sentence for possession of a bladed article in a public place. This sentence was ordered to run concurrently with the life sentence, meaning it is served at the same time rather than added on separately. Please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for your support. 6th case. Pavel Sroka was convicted of murdering Joanna Trojnak in a case that unfolded in Croydon, South London, and later ended in a life sentence at the Old Bailey. This was not a crime born from confusion or mutual conflict. It followed a clear pattern seen in many domestic homicide cases. A partner tried to leave, and the other responded with deadly violence. Joanna Trojnak was 29 years old. She lived with Pavel Sroka in a house on Meadvale Road in Croydon. By early 2016, the relationship had deteriorated badly. Friends later told police that Joanna wanted to leave and start a life away from Sroka. She had begun making practical plans to do so, including redirecting her mail to a new address. Prosecutors said this discovery angered Sroka and deepened his jealousy. To him, Joanna's decision to leave meant losing control over the relationship. On the evening of 23 March 2016, tensions inside the home reached a breaking point. That night, Joanna told Sroka she wanted to end the relationship and leave him. According to the prosecution, this conversation triggered what police later described as a jealous rage. Instead of allowing her to go, Sroka reacted with violence. During the confrontation, he attacked Joanna with a knife, stabbing her multiple times. Joanna Trojnak suffered severe injuries, including stab wounds to her chest, face, and hand. Evidence presented later in court showed that she tried to defend herself during the attack. Emergency services were called shortly before 9 p.m., but her injuries were fatal. Joanna died inside the home she shared with Sroka on the same night she tried to leave the relationship. After the stabbing, Pavel Sroka fled the scene. Police later confirmed that he had also inflicted injuries on himself. He was found later that evening near Gordon Crescent in Croydon, suffering from stab wounds and a shoulder injury. Officers arrested him that night on suspicion of murder. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police Service launched a full investigation. They gathered forensic evidence from the house, statements from neighbors and friends, and background information about the relationship. Sroka did not provide a detailed account to police. During official interviews, he largely remained silent and gave no comment responses. It was only later, during court proceedings, that he claimed he had acted in self-defense. Prosecutors rejected that claim. They told the court that the evidence did not support a defensive act. The number and placement of Joanna's injuries, combined with the context of her trying to leave the relationship, pointed instead to a sustained and deliberate attack. The Crown's case was clear. Joanna Trojnak was killed because she tried to leave a controlling and jealous partner. Pavel Sroka was formally charged in April 2016, shortly after the killing. The legal process began that year and continued through pre-trial hearings and preparations. The case eventually went before a jury at the Old Bailey, where the full evidence was laid out. During the trial, jurors heard how Joanna had been planning to leave and how that decision became the trigger for the violence. Prosecutors stressed that the moment someone tries to leave a controlling relationship is often the most dangerous. They argued that this case followed that pattern exactly. The defense maintained that Sroka had not intended to kill and that the situation escalated during an argument. The jury did not accept that explanation. In April 2017, after hearing all the evidence, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Pavel Sroka was found guilty of murder. The conviction confirmed that the court accepted the prosecution's account of what happened on March 23, 2016. At sentencing, the judge spoke about the seriousness of the crime and the circumstances surrounding it. The court emphasized that Joanna Trojnak was attacked for asserting her right to leave the relationship. The killing took place in her own home, and she had tried to defend herself. Pavel Sroka was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years. Seventh case. Michael Lane could not accept rejection. When Shauna Grace ended their brief relationship in early 2016 and returned to a former boyfriend, Lane's response was not to move on. It was to watch, track, and control. What followed was a documented chain of warnings, reports, and missed opportunities that ended in one of the UK's most harrowing stalking-related murders. Shauna Grace was 19 years old, living independently in Brighton, when she decided the relationship with Lane was over. It had lasted only a short time, but Lane reacted as if he had lost something he believed he owned. After the breakup, Shauna made her wishes clear. She did not want contact. Lane ignored that boundary. His jealousy intensified when he learned she had gone back to a previous boyfriend. Prosecutors later told the court that this rejection became the core of his fixation. Between February and July 2016, Shauna contacted Sussex police exactly 5 times in 6 months. Each report added another piece to a growing picture of danger. She reported being followed and watched. She said Lane repeatedly contacted her despite being told to stop. She reported damage to her car, including slashed tires. These were not vague complaints. They were specific incidents that showed a pattern of stalking. One of the most damaging moments came in March 2016. Shauna reported that Lane had pulled her hair and snatched her phone. Instead of treating this as a report of domestic abuse, officers viewed the complaint through the wrong lens. They treated it as part of an ongoing relationship dispute, calling it a smokescreen. Shauna was issued a £90 fixed penalty notice for wasting police time. That decision would later be widely criticized after her death. What police did not fully understand at the time was how closely Lane was monitoring her. Evidence later presented in court showed that Lane had secretly placed a GPS tracking device on Shauna's car. Every time she moved, his phone alerted him. Prosecutors explained that this allowed Lane to follow her routine in real time. This was not coincidence or chance encounters. It was deliberate tracking. In July 2016, just weeks before the murder, another serious incident occurred. Lane used a stolen key to enter Shauna's home while she was sleeping. He stood and watched her. Shauna reported this to police. Lane admitted taking the key and was given a caution for theft. Despite the seriousness of the behavior, no further stalking protections were put in place. No restraining order followed. The pattern continued. After the murder, investigators uncovered even more disturbing context. Lane had previously been reported for stalking or harassing at least 13 other women. Among those reports was an allegation involving the grooming of a 14-year-old girl. This history showed that his behavior toward Shauna was not an isolated reaction to rejection, but part of a much wider pattern. By late August 2016, the risk had reached its highest point. On 25 August 2016, Lane went to Shauna's home in Brighton. Prosecutors were clear. This was not a chance visit. Inside the house, Lane carried out an extreme act of violence. He slit Shauna's throat, killing her. Afterward, he set fire to her bedroom with her body inside, attempting to destroy evidence. Emergency services were called, but Shauna was pronounced dead at the scene. She had been killed in the one place she should have been safest. Police arrested Michael Lane shortly after. As detectives rebuilt the timeline, the earlier reports took on devastating clarity. 5 police contacts in 6 months, a GPS tracker, a stolen key, repeated warnings that went unheeded. Prosecutors argued that jealousy and control drove every step of Lane's actions. There was no evidence of self-defense. Shauna had tried to create distance. Lane refused to accept it. Lane's trial took place in 2017 at Lewis Crown Court. Jurors heard in detail about the brief relationship, the breakup, and the months of stalking that followed. They learned how Lane tracked Shauna's movements using GPS, how he entered her home without permission, and how he ignored clear signals to stop. The prosecution framed the case around obsession, showing how Lane treated rejection as a threat to control rather than a boundary to respect. The jury found Michael Lane guilty of murder. At sentencing, the judge focused on the sustained nature of the stalking and the deliberate steps Lane took before the killing. Lane was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 25 years before he can apply for parole. The court made clear that the sentence reflected not just the killing itself, but the long chain of behavior that led to it. 8 Case. Gurjinder Singh Dhaliwal admitted responsibility for the killing of Maple Battalia, a 19-year-old university student whose life ended after a violent attack on a campus parking structure. Maple Battalia was a student at Simon Fraser University attending classes at the Surrey campus. By the fall of 2011, her relationship with Dhaliwal was over. She was trying to move forward with her life. He was not willing to accept that reality. What followed was driven by jealousy, fixation, and planning. Maple Battalia and Gurjinder Singh Dhaliwal had previously been in a romantic relationship. After it ended, people close to Maple said she wanted distance and independence. Court records later showed that Dhaliwal struggled deeply with the breakup. He became increasingly focused on her movements and reacted strongly when he believed she was spending time with other male students. Prosecutors described his behavior as jealous and obsessive, rooted in a belief that Maple no longer belonged to him. In the days leading up to the attack, Dhaliwal did not act alone. Another man, Gursimar Bedi, played a supporting role. According to court findings, Bedi acted as the eyes and ears for Dhaliwal. He followed Maple Battalia for several days, tracking her routines and movements on and around the Surrey campus. This information was then passed back to Dhaliwal. Prosecutors said this surveillance helped Dhaliwal plan the attack and confirmed when Maple would be alone. On the night of September 28, 2011, Maple Battalia was on the SFU Surrey campus after a late-night study session. Close to midnight, she walked to a parkade, heading to her car. It was a normal routine for a university student finishing a long day, but Maple was being watched. Dhaliwal was nearby, armed and waiting. Court evidence showed that Dhaliwal confronted Maple in the parkade. He shot her and then continued the attack with a knife, slashing her 11 times on the head. The violence was extreme and sustained. Maple collapsed beside her car, critically injured. She was found with a pulse, and emergency responders rushed her to Royal Columbian Hospital. Despite efforts to save her, Maple Battalia later died from her injuries at the hospital. She was 19 years old. The discovery of the attack sent shockwaves through the Surrey campus. Students arriving the next day were met with police tape and investigators. A place meant for study and safety had become the setting for a brutal crime. Vigils were held as classmates, staff, and community members gathered to remember Maple and to mourn a life cut short. Police quickly focused their investigation on Gurjinder Singh Dhaliwal. Evidence placed him on campus at the time of the attack. Phone records, surveillance, and witness information tied him directly to the killing. Investigators also uncovered the role of Gursimar Bedi, who had followed Maple in the days before the attack and helped Dhaliwal afterward. Bedi's actions, prosecutors said, showed that the crime involved preparation and assistance, not a spontaneous outburst. Dhaliwal was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. As the case moved through the courts, prosecutors detailed how jealousy over seeing Maple with another male student intensified his fixation. They argued that the attack was intentional and driven by an inability to accept the end of the relationship. The Crown described Maple as having done nothing wrong. She had simply exercised her right to move on with her life. The legal process stretched on for years. Maple Battalia's family endured repeated court appearances and delays. Then, in March 2016, on what was scheduled to be the first day of his trial, Gurjinder Singh Dhaliwal entered a guilty plea. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging responsibility for Maple's death and avoiding a full jury trial. Under Canadian law, second-degree murder carries a mandatory life sentence. During sentencing, the court heard emotional victim impact statements from Maple's family. They spoke about her kindness, her goals, and the future she had planned. The judge emphasized that jealousy and obsession were central to the crime and that the level of violence was severe. Dhaliwal was sentenced to life imprisonment, with parole eligibility set at 21 years. Gursimar Bedi was also held accountable. The court found that his role as an accessory after the fact was significant. By helping Dhaliwal track Maple beforehand and assisting him after the killing, Bedi contributed to the crime's execution and its aftermath. He was convicted and sentenced to 18 months in prison for being an accessory after the fact. The ninth case. Paul Jason Sultana was sentenced after a crime that showed how jealousy and control can turn deadly when a partner tries to leave. The woman he killed was Dana Isaac, a young woman who had made a clear choice to end the relationship and move on with her life. That choice should have been safe, Instead, it became the moment that ended her life. By January 2023, Dana Isaac was living in her unit in Penrith in Western Sydney. Evidence later presented in court showed the relationship had become unsafe. Paul Sultana struggled with jealousy and control. Messages, witness statements, and trial testimony showed that Dana wanted the relationship to stop. She wanted space. She wanted peace. She wanted to live without fear. Prosecutors said this decision deeply angered Sultana and became the trigger for what followed. On the day of the killing, Sultana did not arrive by accident. Court evidence showed he rode his bicycle to Dana's unit carrying rope and tape. He did not knock and leave. He waited. The court heard he stayed nearby for nearly 3 hours, lying in wait for her to return home. This detail became central to the case because it showed planning. The judge later said this waiting period proved the violence was not sudden or accidental. When Dana returned to her unit, an argument began inside. There was no public scene, no shouting heard by strangers. No one outside could see what was happening. Inside the unit, the situation quickly turned violent. Medical evidence later showed Dana was beaten and strangled. The injury showed the attack was sustained and forceful. Prosecutors told the court this was not a brief loss of control. It was an act driven by rage and refusal to accept that the relationship was over. Dana Isaac was 28 years old when her life was taken. The court heard that she was conscious during part of the attack and tried to survive. The judge described her final moments as filled with fear. These findings weighed heavily during sentencing and were spoken about in detail to reflect the seriousness of the crime. After the killing, Sultana did not call for help. He did not seek assistance. Instead, prosecutors showed that he took Dana's car and drove it to nearby bushland. There, he set the vehicle on fire. The court accepted this action as an attempt to destroy evidence and delay discovery. This step became another key part of the prosecution case, showing awareness of guilt and deliberate action after the crime. Police later arrested Sultana. There was no confusion about who was responsible. Investigators found no sign of an outside attacker. The evidence at the unit, the burned vehicle, forensic findings, and the history of the relationship all pointed to Sultana. Prosecutors said the danger came from someone Dana knew and trusted, which is a common pattern in intimate partner violence cases. The case was heard by the Supreme Court of New South Wales. During the trial, the judge listened to weeks of evidence outlining Sultana's jealousy and controlling behavior. The court heard that Dana had tried to distance herself from him. Her decision to leave was clear. The violence that followed was equally clear. In September 2025, the court found Paul Sultana guilty of murder. Immediately after the guilty verdict was delivered, there was a serious incident inside the courtroom. Reports confirmed that Sultana attempted to harm himself in the dock and had to be taken to the hospital. Proceedings were briefly disrupted, but the conviction stood. The judge later made clear that the incident did not affect the finding of guilt. During sentencing, the court also considered medical evidence about Sultana's mental health. After his arrest, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Expert testimony was heard, and the diagnosis was reviewed carefully. The judge ruled that while the condition was acknowledged, it did not reduce his moral responsibility for the crime. The court found that Sultana understood his actions and their consequences at the time of the killing. In December 2025, the sentence was handed down. Paul Sultana received a maximum prison sentence of 44 years, with a non-parole period of 33 years. The judge said the sentence reflected the extreme violence involved, the planning before the attack, and the actions taken afterward to hide the crime. The 10th case. Sven Lindemann's relationship with Monique Lesak ended in May 2023 inside her own home in Melbourne's southeast. What followed was laid out in detail during court proceedings and later sentencing. Judges made it clear this was not confusion, panic, or a sudden mistake. It was a sustained attack driven by jealousy, control, and a refusal to accept that Monique was moving on with her life. By the time of her death, Monique Lesak was trying to change the direction of her life. Evidence presented to the court showed she had attempted to end the relationship with Lindemann. Messages and conversations revealed a growing distance between them. Prosecutors explained that Monique had begun looking toward a future without him. A critical moment came when Lindemann learned that she had shown interest in another man. Instead of accepting that reality, he confronted her. The court later found that this discovery became a key trigger for the violence that followed. The killing took place in May 2023 inside Monique's home in Victoria. Lindemann was inside the house with her when an argument escalated. According to court findings, he attacked Monique with knives, stabbing her 17 times using more than one blade. Emergency services were called, but her injuries were fatal. Monique died at the scene. Police arrested Lindemann shortly afterward, and the investigation quickly established what had happened inside the home. One of the most serious aggravating factors in the case was the presence of Monique's children. She was a mother of 2, and at least one of her children tried to intervene during the attack. The judge later described this detail as deeply significant. The violence happened in a place meant to be safe, with children witnessing events that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. This fact played a major role in how the court assessed the seriousness of the crime. Lindemann later pleaded guilty to murder. That plea removed any doubt about responsibility and allowed the court to focus fully on motive, intent, and impact. Prosecutors told the court that jealousy and control were at the center of the killing. They emphasized that Monique posed no threat to Lindemann and that nothing about her actions justified violence. The number of stab wounds and the length of the attack showed persistence, not a brief lapse in judgment. In May 2024, Lindemann appeared before the Supreme Court of Victoria for sentencing. Justice Elizabeth Hollingworth delivered firm remarks from the bench. She described the murder as the most extreme form of family violence. The judge said Lindemann's actions were driven by rage, jealousy, and a belief that he was entitled to control Monique's choices. She rejected arguments that his behavior in court reflected genuine remorse, dismissing what she called crocodile tears and pointing to a clear victim blame mentality. The sentence reflected the severity of those findings. Lindemann was sentenced to 31 years in prison, with a minimum non-parole period of 25 years. This meant he would not be eligible to apply for parole until mid-2048, when he will be 76 years old. The judge said the length of the sentence was necessary because of the sustained nature of the attack, the presence of children, and the role jealousy played in the killing. After sentencing, Lindemann launched an appeal, arguing that the 31-year term was manifestly excessive. His lawyers claimed the court failed to properly consider what they described as his previously unblemished life. As of early 2026, that appeal has not resulted in a reduction of the sentence. The original ruling remains in place, and the parole timeline has not changed. The 11th case. Nathawat Tamajanta did not act in confusion or chaos. When the case was examined in the New South Wales Supreme Court, judges described the killing as the result of intense, irrational jealousy and a desire for control carried out through a sequence of deliberate actions. On December 18, 2022, Tamajanta murdered his girlfriend Manthana Canarat, known as Nancy, at a home in Albion Park Rail south of Wollongong. Manthana, Nancy Canarat, was described by family and friends as independent and determined to live her life freely. Evidence presented in court showed that this independence became a source of tension in the relationship. Prosecutors explained that jealousy had taken hold and that Tamajanta increasingly struggled with Nancy's autonomy. Judges emphasized that Nancy's behavior, wanting space, freedom, and control over her own choices, was normal and lawful. The danger came from Tamajanta's reaction to that independence. On the night of December 18, 2022, an argument inside the Albion Park Rail home escalated into violence. Forensic evidence revealed that Nancy attempted to escape. During the assault, she ran to a bathroom and locked herself inside, trying to protect herself and put a barrier between her and the attacker. That detail became critical in court. It demonstrated awareness of danger and a clear effort to survive. The evidence showed that Nathawut Tamajanta broke down the bathroom door and continued the attack. Prosecutors relied on this sequence to show persistence and intent. Nancy's attempt to escape did not stop the violence. Emergency services were later called, but she could not be saved. Police arrested Tamajanta and began building a case that focused not just on the fatal injuries, but on how the violence unfolded step by step. Physical evidence played a significant role. When police examined Tamajanta the following day, his hands were visibly swollen and lacerated. Officers photographed them as evidence. In court, prosecutors described the injuries to his hands as consistent with a sustained and forceful assault. Judges later referred to the beating as savage and sustained, language that reflected both the medical findings and the condition of the defendant's hands after the attack. Despite this evidence, Tamajanta initially tried to minimize what had happened. In early statements to police, he denied hitting Nancy and claimed she had merely fallen down the stairs. Investigators quickly challenged that account. Forensic findings, the damage to the bathroom door, and the condition of Tamajanta's hands directly contradicted his version of events. The court later noted these early claims as an attempt to downplay responsibility in the immediate aftermath. During proceedings in the New South Wales Supreme Court, prosecutors presented a clear narrative. They described a relationship shaped by jealousy and control, followed by a violent episode in which Nancy tried to escape and was pursued. The court heard that Tamajanta was intoxicated at the time of the offense, a factor acknowledged during sentencing. Judges were explicit, however, that intoxication did not reduce culpability. Instead, it formed part of the broader context of impaired judgment layered on top of possessive behavior. The court rejected any suggestion of accident or mutual conflict. Nancy posed no threat. Her attempt to lock herself away was treated as powerful evidence of fear and self-preservation. Judges emphasized that the violence continued even after she tried to remove herself from danger. This sequence undermined any claim that the killing occurred in a brief, uncontrolled moment. Sentencing took place in September 2024. Nathawut Tamajanta was convicted of murder and sentenced to a maximum term of 23 years and 4 months, with a non-parole period of 16 years and 4 months. The judge stated that the sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime, the evidence of persistence, and the role of jealousy and control in driving the violence. The court also noted a consequence that extends beyond imprisonment. As a non-citizen, Tamajanta is expected to be deported to Thailand upon any eventual release from custody. While parole eligibility does not guarantee release, the court acknowledged that removal from Australia would likely follow under immigration law. The 12th and final case. Rohit Deepak Singh is the man responsible for the death of Arishma Chand, a young mother living in South Auckland. This case is not about a relationship that suddenly turned violent. It is about fixation after rejection, and how that fixation continued long after a clear breakup. By the time Arishma Chand was killed in November 2017, the relationship had been over for more than a year. One person had moved on. The other had not. Rohit Deepak Singh and Arishma Chand were involved in a secret on-and-off relationship that ended in August 2016. Court records show the breakup followed Chand's decision to terminate a pregnancy, a decision she did not want to go through with Singh. After that point, she ended the relationship and chose to move forward with her life. Singh did not accept the separation. Evidence later showed he remained emotionally attached and resentful, treating the end of the relationship as temporary, even though Chand made her wishes clear. By 2017, Arishma Chand had rebuilt her life. She was focused on work, family, and her young child. She had also begun a new relationship. Singh, however, continued to monitor her movements and remained emotionally invested. Prosecutors later described his behavior as intrusive and persistent. Messages, tracking of her location, and repeated attempts to stay connected showed that the breakup had not ended his sense of control. In the days before the killing, Singh's behavior became more concerning. Trial evidence revealed that he told a friend he was trying to find a large kitchen knife. Prosecutors relied on this statement to show preparation and intent. While Arishma Chand was later stabbed multiple times, police were never able to recover the weapon used in the attack. The knife itself was never found, but the court accepted that a bladed weapon had been used based on the injuries and surrounding evidence. On the evening of November 11, 2017, Arishma Chand spent time with her current boyfriend. Later that night, she returned alone to her home in Manurawa, in South Auckland. As the night went on, Chand became uneasy. She believed someone was outside her house. Just before the attack, she called her parents and told them she felt unsafe and thought someone was there. That phone call would become one of the last things she did. In the early hours of November 12, 2017, Rohit Deepak Singh attacked Arishma Chand inside her home. Evidence presented at trial showed she fought back. DNA from Singh was later found under Chand's fingernails, confirming she tried to defend herself. She suffered multiple stab wounds and died at the scene. Emergency services were called, but she could not be saved. She was 24 years old. Police began investigating immediately. The nature of the attack suggested the killer was someone Chand knew. Within days, attention focused on Rohit Deepak Singh. In an attempt to distance himself from the crime, Singh tried to create a false alibi. He called 111, New Zealand's emergency number, claiming he had been robbed and scratched by 3 women on the North Shore. Investigators quickly determined the story did not match timelines or physical evidence. The scratches Singh reported were consistent with defensive injuries inflicted by Arishma Chand during the attack, not a robbery. Singh was arrested 3 days after the killing and charged with murder. As the investigation continued, police uncovered phone records, movement data, and witness statements that placed him near Chand's home at the relevant time. Prosecutors argued the killing was not spontaneous. They said Singh followed Chand, waited for her to be alone, and attacked her after she returned home. The Crown described the crime as driven by jealousy and an inability to accept rejection. The trial took place in the High Court of New Zealand at Auckland in 2018. Jurors heard detailed evidence about Singh's fixation on Chand after the relationship ended. One detail that stood out was that Singh had tattooed Chand's face on his chest after the breakup. Prosecutors used this to illustrate how deeply he remained attached and how he viewed her as something he still possessed, despite her decision to move on. The defense argued that Singh was emotionally distressed and did not plan the killing. The jury rejected this explanation. After several weeks of testimony, the jury retired to deliberate. After approximately 40 to 45 minutes, they returned with a unanimous verdict. Rohit Deepak Singh was found guilty of murder. Sentencing took place in February 2019. The judge outlined several aggravating factors. The attack occurred in Chand's own home. She had attempted to defend herself, and the killing followed a prolonged pattern of jealousy and fixation. The court also acknowledged the impact on Chand's family and her child, who would grow up without a mother. Rohit Deepak Singh was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 19 years. Later in 2019, Singh appealed the length of the non-parole period. He argued that 19 years was excessive. The Court of Appeal dismissed the appeal. In its decision, the court described the murder as calculated, brutal, and callous, stating that the sentence properly reflected the seriousness of the crime and Singh's actions before and after the killing. As of the most recent court records, Rohit Deepak Singh remains in prison in New Zealand, serving his life sentence. He will not be eligible to apply for parole until at least 2036, and any future release would depend on the parole board's assessment of risk. I hope you found this murder documentary interesting. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel.